Welcome to the People You Should Know podcast, telling the stories of people you should know and allowing their greatness to inspire everyday people. And now, here are your weekly hosts, Danny Ferry and David Farwell.
Hello and welcome to the People You Should Know podcast. I'm your host, Danny Ferry. Alongside me today is my co-host, Dave Farwell. For our first-time listeners, we want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, Stitcher, or whatever platform you are using to listen to us right now. Also, if you are listening to the podcast or have been listening to the other episodes and really enjoying it, would you consider leaving us a review on the platform you are listening to us on? Leaving us a review will help other people be able to find us and listen to our great content. Dave, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well as long as I don't go outside, Danny Ferry. It's supposed to be 111 degrees here in Southern California today. And even though that is just plain brutal, I wouldn't trade it for anything. So it's a good day. A good day. I'm happy to be on here. Really excited about our guest today. This is just going to turn out to be quite the incredible episode.
Yeah, I'm always pumped for every show. Like I'm super energized. I'm not faking this level of energy because I really enjoy these conversations. I've often said I leave these episodes and I'm just very energized because we're getting to talk with some great people. But today's show is one that I think for a lot of people, maybe you're listening to this podcast, you're on your way to work, you're on your way home from work, and you're just feeling like, man, I really hate what I'm doing in life as far as a career or, even what you're doing with your life. And so, listen, if you're listening to the podcast, you're feeling that unsettled, unhappy feeling, just know we've all been there at one point or another. But I have hope because today's podcast guest has an incredible story from working as a cabinet maker for a tour bus company to now being one of the most influential voices in the website design and digital marketing community. So I'm extremely excited for us to get a chance to talk to our guest, Josh Hall. Dave, I wanted to ask you, do you recall a time when you were working in a job and or doing something in life that you just thought to yourself, this doesn't feel right?
Oh, man. I believe my life is full of those stories, Danny, especially the early part of my life. I will share one in particular. I've had a lot of interesting jobs early on in my life, but I remember working for a cheese factory in Western New York. Let's just let that sink in for a minute. Working for a cheese factory, and they called me and said, hey, we got this old milk silo outside that we need to clean out before we get rid of it. And the old style of milk silos, there was about 3 feet of milk that they couldn't get out because the valve was about 3 feet up the side. So I walk outside and they're using a oxygen meter to make sure that it's safe for me to go inside of this silo. And so they test it. I put on the suit and I walk in. Y'all, I'm not kidding when I tell you I was standing on top of milk. It had solidified and curdled so much, I'm standing on top of it. And they hand me a hot water hose and say, hey, we need you to start breaking this up and shoveling it out of this silo. And long story short, let me just tell all of you who are listening, within the first 90 seconds of hitting that milk with that hot water, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that the thought crossed my mind, this is not the job for me. This does not feel right. And it was brutal.
What? First of all, I don't know if anybody else is wondering, but what was the smell like? What was that?
You're going to cause PTSD here.
I'm just... Because I worked in a dairy as well, right? You remember maybe I worked in a dairy, but I would just give our listeners a little insight into.
Look. Let's suffice it to say this: that within the first few minutes of being there, the smell was so rancid that I literally vomited 5 times.
That is awesome.
Not even kidding. Like, I could not stop retching from the smell that's coming up. And I hope that this is not I know some people have like that sympathetic thing that happens in them when they hear someone tell a story. I hope that you're okay on the other side of this podcast.
I've told Laura that I have that whenever she's pregnant. So I've sympathized by gaining some weight each time we had a kid. So I definitely understand where you're coming from on that one. Well, it's really funny. I have had a similar situation. I actually went to school for about 3 years, became a nuclear medicine technologist. It's actually kind of an embarrassing story for me because anything I've ever really put like a lot of effort into or really tried hard at, I've been fairly successful in life. Like, even if I didn't have the skills, my effort always like made up for not, maybe not having those skills. Like, I could outwork people because, that was just the way that I was built. My parents instilled that in me, work hard. And so I went to school, graduated like magna cum laude, right, from nuke med school, was ready to rock and roll, go into the healthcare industry. And can I just say that like that experience for me was just a complete and utter failure. I spent 5 years working in the nuclear medicine field, and it was pretty early on. I'll actually tell this really embarrassing story. There was this machine that we used that would inject people with a radioactive tracer, and I actually was driving this machine, and it started climbing up the wall, and almost flipped over full of like a radioactive tracer inside of it. And that was like one of my first weeks. Yeah, I know. Like, I drive a car, I don't have that happen, but this thing somehow got out of control. And honestly, from that moment, I kind of was like, I'm not sure if this is the job for me. I spent another 4 years there, and there were other various moments, but I was pretty sure actually from that moment on, like, I'm not sure if this is going to work out. Like, this just feels not right. And, when you invest like 7 years, right, going to school, then working in the field, and it's like, this isn't right for me. A lot of times it can be really easy to just stick it out because it's like, I invested a lot of time into something, right?
True.
So I want to just give our listeners a little bit of hope that
right.
If you spend 7 years really working at something and you're feeling like, hey, this just isn't working out, don't feel trapped. There's a way out of it, and follow your passion for sure. So,
right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the People You Should Know podcast is sponsored by Empowered Creative. Empowered Creative is a digital marketing company that helps you build a positive online reputation and increase your online leads. Are you embarrassed by the way your website looks? Do you feel overwhelmed with trying to manage your online marketing strategy? Or do you just want to feel confident that your online presence is actually having an impact? Dave, we just went through a little bit of SEO training a few minutes ago, right? Showing how you can actually see that your website's having an impact. So visit empoweredcreative.co, click book a consultation, and you will be on your way to building a positive online reputation and increasing your leads. And better than that, you're going to have that confidence that you deserve, that your business has an awesome online presence. So Dave, I think it's that time.
Let's do it.
I'm super excited. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to bring in our guest, Josh Hall. Josh, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, man?
Doing awesome, guys. Thanks for having me on today here.
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, Josh was kind enough to have me on his podcast last year, and it was my first podcasting experience. So it was extremely frightening because there's a lot of unknowns, but then also, and Dave, maybe you can talk about it. You don't want to sound dumb when you're on a podcast, right?
It's bad enough to be standing in a physical social setting and realizing that everyone around you is smarter than you. But even worse when you're isolated on a podcast, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I ask Josh questions, I wanted to give a little backstory, Josh, and really give you kudos because when I started my website design company, a lot of times what I would be doing is I would be working on my website and I would be trying to make it do something. That's the terminology I'll use just, for the sake of our audience. And I couldn't figure out how to make it happen. And so I always joke, I graduated from YouTube University, and I would go to YouTube and I would search how to do something. And every single time I searched for how to do something, there was this Josh Hall guy that kept popping up with these videos that were just on point. Like they were exactly what I needed step by step. And so, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you, because I don't know if I'm here right now if you didn't make those videos, man.
That's awesome, Danny. Well, thank you, man. I mean, it's been cool to see your journey because you came into my courses years ago. And I've seen you kind of transition from web designer to building your agency, which is where my focus is right now, is really helping people build their web design business. And then now you're a full-blown webpreneur. I think that's kind of the new term that's kind of hot right now. It's this webpreneur where you're versed with websites and entrepreneurship, but you're getting into like more broad online business. And the sky is the limit, man. That's what's really cool about the web world in general, or online world in general, is you can do whatever you want to do. If you like it and you're good at it and you find your superpower, go for it. And you can do some awesome, you can make a big impact, and you can make some money too, which is great.
Yeah, Josh, when we just to open the show here today, we were just saying that anybody that was listening that was feeling unhappy, anybody that was just kind of driving to work, listening to the podcast, thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, I'm doing this again. Or maybe like is doing something and they're like, I'm not sure that this is what I'm supposed to be doing in life. We just gave them a whole lot of hope and said, you want to listen to this podcast, you want to listen to our interview with Josh, because I really think as we talk about your journey from where you started to where you are now, it's just going to be so full of hope to the audience.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. The pressure's on. Let's roll.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So just to start off, I've heard your story, obviously. And for those of you who are looking for other podcasts, let me just give you a quick plug. Josh has a website design business podcast that you can listen to and search them. We're going to put it in the links below as well. But he's told his story on there. But Josh, for the sake of our audience who maybe has never met you before, tell us a little bit about your time working as a cabinet maker for the tour bus company.
Sure. Yeah. The short story is I was a cabinet maker for a tour bus customizing shop. And I did that. I basically went from sweeping floors in high school to becoming a cabinet maker. And then at that time, I was also a drummer in a rock band. And then my rock band ended up playing more and more. And we got some decent exposure throughout the U.S. and traveled quite a bit. And we did a lot of shows. And I was also working day job as a cabinet maker. But I got laid off from my day job in 2009 when the economy really got hit back then, particularly the automotive end of things. So I got laid off, but I was doing graphic design. Well, I had always had an interest in art and things. And so when I got laid off, the day after, I said, I'm going to dive into Photoshop. I have interest in this. I started doing graphic design work for my band at the start. I started doing T-shirt design and CD artwork and stuff like that. And then the light bulb moment for me in the beginning was we were playing a festival and somebody asked who did our artwork. And I said, I did. And they were like, how much would you charge to do ours? And for me, it was like, wow, I could make money at something that I actually enjoy doing. I didn't hate my cabinet job, but it was not what I wanted to do long term. And I dreaded Monday mornings going into the shop. I just wasn't cut out for me. So that's when I started charging for design work. And that's what really launched me into this world of graphic design initially before I even got into websites.
That is a really funny story. So I don't know that I've shared this with a whole lot of people or listeners, but Josh, Dave and I actually have a fairly similar story to when I started in website design. Me and him were actually going to a church to tear down, some of the lighting that they put over top. And I was just telling him about how I was working in this career and I didn't like it. And he just was prodding me, like, what do you like to do? What are things you enjoy? And I mentioned website design. I mentioned working with computers. And he said, and Dave, you can speak to this a little bit more, but he said to me, I don't have a website or somebody that you can design a website for, but I know somebody that is having a tough time figuring out how to edit a PDF file. And if you can figure out how to do it, I'm pretty sure they'll pay you for it. Dave, do you remember that conversation when that happened?
Clear as day. I remember that conversation. I remember thinking in the back of my mind, I've got this company that I started that's just not doing a whole lot. I was just kind of doing like, grassroots web design for a handful of people myself, and really realized that I hate web design. I don't want to do it. And here comes this guy that's talking about, well, I kind of like to do it, but I wasn't really sure what your capabilities were.
Right.
And I remember thinking, this will be a fun little litmus test. What's this guy got? Does he got chops or not? And to put you out there and do that, and for you to be the owner of Empowered Creative is a tremendous story for me. It gives me a lot of joy to look back at that moment, pulling down rigging from a ceiling in a church to where you are now, man. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, that was fun. I always look back at that time, the small conversations that you have. Josh, I wanted to ask you, so you're working at the cabinet factory. Before they laid you off, did you just kind of fall into the next step, or were you pretty content? Like, if they would not have laid you off, how do you think the course of history might be for you?
I love that question. I have thought about that. Like, what if there was no changes at that point? Because they did offer me the job back about a year later. And that was a really big, important moment because I decided not to go back. And I remember my mom saying, Josh, I think you're crazy. I was basically just doing odd jobs at that point. I wasn't even really making any money with my design stuff. I mean, I think it was late 2000. I got laid off in early 2009. It was later 2009 when I started just doing freelance design work, because it took a while to learn design and Photoshop and all the things.
Yeah.
So I really didn't have, the financial means to say no, but I did because I just felt like I was just going to be sliding right back into that. It was going to be hard to get out of stable income, even though it was like $11 an hour at that point. But yeah,
big money back then.
Big money, baby. I really did not have a vision at that point. But looking back, it's a good life lesson. Sometimes the thing that can devastate you or really make you feel like, oh gosh, they don't want me. I mean, I felt like, they're saving half the company, but I'm in the half that got laid off. What's wrong with me? You can feel those feelings, but it ended up being such a blessing and such a hidden gift because it's what started the new trajectory for me. But one thing I wanted to say as you guys were talking is it's interesting. What I've seen in web design and designers in particular, most people don't start with like formal education and start with a business plan. We usually fall into it somehow. Like for you, Danny, looked like Dave was somebody who was like, hey, you might be able to do this, give it a try. And then I'm guessing that planted the seed to keep on going. For me, it was that dude in the band who was like, how much would you charge for our t-shirt design? I'm like, whoa. Like I didn't, do graphic design and think I'm going to set up a business. I just kind of fumbled into it. Most web designers just get asked if they can do something. We figure it out. And if you end up liking it, then you can get really good at it and charge a lot more for it. And then you got yourself a business.
That's such a good point. And our just most recent guest before this episode was essentially saying something very similar. Someone asked him like, hey, I don't need graphic design work, but I need a website. Can you do that? And he was like, yes, I can. And then he was Googling how to build a website, right? So I do believe that's how a lot of people get started. I have so much curiosity to ask you about the band that you were in. I actually been Googling it here on the side. And I think I found some clips. We won't bring them up, but maybe that for another time. Love that you have that history, man. And
most web designers do, by the way. I thought I was such a black sheep when I got into the design world. Come to find out, there are so many people who come from a musician background because it translates so oddly well to online entrepreneurship.
Well, that's exactly the curiosity I got going through my head. I started just going back through the mental files here and realizing all these people that I know that are in the design space, creative space, web design space. So many of them are musicians. It's totally wild. And maybe worthy of a little bit of a study. Something that could be some cool stats, right?
Yeah, I don't mean to change the whole topic of the episode, but I love it because when you're a musician, you tinker and you experiment and you're creative and you get your creative juices out, and all of those things are what you need as a web designer and a creative. The problem is most creatives can't meet a deadline and can't wake up to start the day. And, there's all those other aspects where you need like some business help and professional development. But it's the same thing with bands. How many bands do one album and fall apart because they can't continue, they can't stay consistent, they can't set a deadline and make the music and get it done? Like, there's the business aspect, unfortunately, of anything, that if it's going to be profitable and sustainable, you need to have like the business and creative mind working well together. That's definitely what I had to learn when I transitioned to business. That's
a truly excellent point, and it's true across the board. It doesn't matter what industry or what space you're in whatsoever. For most bands, they have that first passion project, right? And once it gets beyond just the passion of it, and it's got to get into like the nitty gritty of the business. What a great point, Josh. So you're in this band. Let's just review a little bit back, right? You're in this band. You've had a lot of transitions, things going on, doing cabinets, not doing cabinets, doing all this different stuff. When did you first start working in like website design work? What was that like first project like, or the first couple of projects? Just tell us a little bit about the start of web design.
Well, it's so eerily similar to your guys' story. I think Danny probably knows this because he's heard me talk about it on my show. But the church I was helping out with at the time, it was about a year into my graphic design interests. They found out I was doing design, and they had no one to help them with their website. This was in 2010. And they were like, hey, we heard you're doing design. You're playing for our band occasionally. You're helping with some other stuff. Would you be interested in doing the website? And I was like, sure. I don't know anything about web design, but I'm happy to try. And I did find that the community college here in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm based out of, they did have a class and a small program you could get into to help you learn some basics of code and early HTML and web design stuff. I won't get too intricate in the coding language, but they paid for that class for me. That kind of helped me get my feet wet. And then, it was Google and just trial and error. That's what got me into web design. And then shortly after that, I realized, wow, I really like web design. And then it was so natural. Once I started building websites, everyone who I was doing graphic design for was like, oh, you do websites too? I need help with that too. And then those two services married very well together for the first few years of my business. So I was doing graphic design and web design. And then once I started doing websites and getting good at it, that's when I really started refining my services. And then next thing, I don't want to fast forward it too far, but
fine.
Essentially my goal when I got into the design world was to be a designer for an agency. But I was doing freelance, and I made about, I think it was around $30,000 on the side one year. And I was like,
well done. Yeah.
If I could do 30 on the side while doing some night classes at this community college and doing my side work jobs I was doing, then I could go full time with this. And that's when I started my business.
Dude, it's so funny. I can tell you have a podcast because we have some questions that we try to prepare with before we bring you on, and you just answered all three of them in one question sequentially. So that's pretty awesome. Dave's like, hey, that's a pro move right there. He knew how
pro move, leveling up as a podcaster. That's awesome. Well, hey, we got to get as much as we can in the time we have together.
That's right. That's right. Hey, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, I'm always curious about this, kind of those like early days. Because to make a big transition from doing something to like doing something maybe you don't like as much, or, taking the leap of faith, maybe you could just give some advice to some listeners about like the early days when like you're dealing with some of the things that you talk about a lot, and we can talk about like imposter syndrome and just some of the confidence things that go with starting something new for the very first time.
Well, imposter syndrome was huge for me, as I found out it is for everyone. But I just had this, and this maybe it's a little bit different now than it was, a dozen years ago. I got into web design in 2010. The market and the industry was very different. I think it's a lot more common now for just anyone to get into web design. There's so many online community options and courses, thank God, and that's why I do what I do. But back then, I don't know how much was out there as far as like online communities for web designers and stuff. There were probably forums and everything, but I felt extremely alone. And nobody in my family is an entrepreneur. No one's a business owner. They didn't discourage me, but they couldn't offer much help or advice in that. And I remember when it was a Dreamweaver web design building class that I took.
Oh, Dreamweaver.
I remember feeling so out of place. And I'm like, I'm a cabinet maker and a drummer. I am not great at computers. I got a D in typing in high school. That's the true irony about what I do now. Like, I'm not great with computers. It's not my thing. So I felt very out of place. But I think what kind of pulled me through is I was good. I tried to hone in on what I was good at. I was good at design. It took me way longer to figure out code than a lot of other people, but I could. And then I found out that I was actually really good at the marketing and the sales aspect because I was good at communication and people. And something I learned early on is even though my first few websites weren't great, I met deadlines. And
Gotcha.
I shared my passion and my care for my clients. Like, even though I could barely throw a website together, it probably wasn't going to be best practice or industry standard. I really cared about my clients, and I was honored that they would pay me at that time, $500 to build a website. So I worked my ass off for those clients, and they could tell that. And it was a good life lesson. Like, even if you're brand new at something, if you care, that is your sales tool. Because people want to know that you care. They don't necessarily, people want competence and you want to be able to follow through. But man, caring about my clients and the work and getting them results was so instrumental with building that confidence in those early days.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a great point. And I'm definitely tagging that clip there in our recording because it's worthy for us to really zero in on that importance because I guess this would lead to the next question, Josh. When we go through the process of developing a business or developing ourselves in a space, even if it's not the business, but you're talking more about just even your own personal development in that space before you're really thinking like agency and all that kind of stuff, right? So you go through this process and you're grinding it out, you're working it out, you're caring for your clients, and there's this statement that's been around for a long time, right? But we have to make a decision if we're going to work in a business or if we're going to work on a business. And do you happen to recall when you started to transition from being someone that was just going to like grind it out and be that person who's working on websites to more about working on something and building something? What was that transition like for you?
I love that question. Yeah, there is always that big pivot for business owners when you go from working in the business to on the business. And it really is a matter of going from a freelancer or a solopreneur to a business owner.
Right.
Now, I was always very opposed to having this big agency that have an office downtown. And I had some colleagues go that route, and I was very envious of that. And I was like, maybe I should, but I just quite frankly I value control and freedom over everything, which is why I feel like I'm built for online entrepreneurship. Stability and all those things those are kind of the things you have to give up when you're an online entrepreneur, because you're going to have good months, bad months, highs and lows. Those are all things that are outside of a typical like salary corporate job. So I say that to say that I had to go from that freelancer mindset to just hustling, doing all the work, to really taking my business seriously. And I went way longer than I recommend most people. Like Danny actually seems like he went pretty quickly into the business owner role. I think most people are probably going to and should probably get to that quicker because it's very hard to be a solopreneur and do all the things yourself for too long.
Right.
Most people burn out. I will say, I don't mean this to sound boastful, but I was just having a conversation with actually somebody Danny probably knows, Tim Streifler of a company called Divvy Life. He and I were talking about how interesting it is as personalities when you're in business, because most people can't do all the things for very long. But he, like me, and I think Danny in probably some ways, we're pretty good at like running the business, doing the sales, doing the client communication, and doing the work and maintaining it for a while. So I say all that to say I got good and content at doing all the things. However, that stunted my growth. And because I was doing all the things, I ended up at some points working way more hours than I probably should have. I quite frankly just wasn't great at all the things. I was like good at certain aspects, but wasn't the best at sales, wasn't the best at processes, wasn't the best designer, wasn't the best coder, but I did good on all the things. But it was when I got married and then eventually we started having a family, that's when I took scaling very seriously. And I joined a business coaching program that was like a 6-month program that really helped me become a business owner. And then I started feeling more comfortable about delegating and not doing all the things. There was a quote I read in a book recently. The book is called Free Time. I highly recommend it, by Jenny Blake. And the quote is, "There's no reward for wearing all the hats in your business other than burnout." And I love that, because maybe burnout happens in 6 months for some people. Maybe it happens in 6 years, like more in my case. It probably would have happened around that mark. But that was coming if I didn't start to share the workload and really focus on building the business. So that was a very long answer, Dave, too. I was just comfortable as a freelancer. I was very content. Sure. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a solopreneur. But if you are going to be a solopreneur, you only have a couple options. You have to be very exclusive, very niche, and you have to raise your rates dramatically. Otherwise, and you have to have some serious systems in place. Otherwise, you are going to frazzle and burn out. But that's what helped me as I started to take my web design business seriously and start to scale it at a very small level. I didn't scale to a big agency. I just had a few subcontractors, and that was enough for me to build a multi-6-figure web design agency.
Man, wow. I find it very ironic that we're having this conversation, because Danny and I were on a conversation just prior to this podcast, or maybe Danny, if you just want to even share where you finding yourself, you've had points along your own path, Danny, of scaling, and here you are yet at another one where you're like, it's time to delegate again. So I find this really ironic that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So Josh, obviously today when we're recording is September 1st, which is the official launch day for our podcast. Like, our first podcast episode was released today. And on the week leading up to this, I mean, I was, creating clips and getting ready to put things on social media and doing all the things you have to do that people don't realize, like our processes that you have to put in place. And I was telling Dave in our call that I need to hire somebody, because somebody's got to take care of the social media. I don't have time for it. And as you said, I'm probably not the best at it. And I think that's just like a really important thing, to almost be willing to say that you're not good at something and hand it off to somebody that's going to be better, because they're going to be able to give you better results than you're going to be able to. And so I was just telling him, like, I'm done with social media. I need it for my digital agency. I need it for the podcast. And you get to a point, and I know, like, it's funny to us because we're in it, but it's like, I don't care what the cost is. Like, I just need to stop having to do it. I'm so sick of it.
That's when you become like investment minded, and you realize, okay, this is leaving my bank account now, but it's going to come back tenfold, ideally. And I don't want to discourage people from trying new things. And I do think it's really valuable to, in the case of like social media, to do it yourself for a little bit, so you know what's involved, you understand the work. That's going to help you hire too. It also is a great way to like create graphics and templates and processes. That way, when you bring somebody in, you can empower them and they can do it for you. It's so funny. Talk about timing. I'm actually literally doing this right now. I'm about to hand off a lot of my social media stuff this month. And it's going to be an investment, but I know I got to get myself out of doing that. I don't want to fiddle around with reels and sizes for Facebook versus Instagram. And but I understand the power of getting my conversations and content out there as much as possible. But either way, what I would say in that, if I could give any advice to that I've learned, is try it yourself for a little bit, but be very quick to like create templates and systems in your processes, and hire that out as quickly as you can. Because it'll say, I know some people who are on a tight budget are going to feel like, I can't hire it out. I don't have any money, but you will likely make way more money as soon as you hire something out, because you free yourself up to do the tasks that you're good at, that you should be doing. You could sell more. You could, it's generally going to pay off very quickly. So I recommend it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, holy cow. I'm going to talk a little bit about networking, because for our podcast, it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. a little bit. So, Josh, I want to ask you if we can go back to I want to talk about where you're currently at, but I just want to. You've had two really good experiences, right? Of growing a company, and so for the first company, the website design agency, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what part did networking play in helping you to grow that business early on.
It was the biggest part. By far, networking was absolutely huge for my business because when I started, this is really common for a lot of web designers and anyone starting a business. I generally recommend everyone asks, how do I get clients? I always recommend you start with the people you know. And it's not necessarily that they're going to be your clients, but it's who they might know.
Right.
There's a ton of different ways to do that. You can post on social media, you can call people, you can meet with people, whatever you want to do. But I mean, the reality is when you start your business, and this is what I learned, there are all these marketing options and there's ads and there's really expensive ways and there's really either money or time. In the beginning, I chose the time route because I had no budget at all. I wasn't going to be doing any marketing. I learned that I wanted to use my time to talk with people I knew. I talked with people who I knew from my church, from the band world, people in my just social circles. And then the word got out that I was doing websites, just like you started with, Danny.
Yeah.
And then that spirals. And if you do a good job and you care, like we talked about before, you really care, then the word is going to spread and you will start getting referrals. And sometimes it'll happen in spurts. Sometimes it might take a little while. It generally does. But if you stick with it, there's always this point where it seems like it just comes in like a flood and you got tons of referrals. That's 100% how it happened for me. And then because my business was 100% referral based. Right. So once I got to a point where my business was fairly stable with just like personal referrals, I joined a networking group. Okay. And I put it off for a year. I got invited to this networking group and I was like, oh, it's once a week. And there's these lawyers and like real estate agents and it's at 8 a.m. No, thank you. But I finally bit the bullet because one of my friends who I knew was starting a new networking group and I went to it. And fortunately, this group happened to be a core of awesome people. Networking is one of those things. It's people. You could go to a group of people, it could be awesome. You could go to another group of people, they're terrible. That's what's going to happen in networking. You have to kind of find who you fit with or start a group. And there's a quote that has stuck with me in regards to networking, and that is your vibe attracts your tribe. So I felt like we were all very like-minded in this group, and then that just exploded. And I mean, it wasn't a massive group. It always hovered between 15 and 30 people, but I was in that networking group for 8 years and eventually was the president for a couple of years because it was so powerful. And it was a business-to-business style networking group to where there was only one industry category like per group. So like I was the only web designer. There's one real estate agent, one chiropractor, one plumber, etc. Yeah. And what I learned though is like some of those people became my clients and became awesome clients, which was great. But the true power of networking is that those 20 people, they become your sales force. Yes. And you talked about this on my show, Danny. If you support the people around you and you don't necessarily need to sell them, but you just share. And even if you don't know that much, just share what you know. You know way more than there's other people who aren't web designers or whatever your industry is. Like we had a photographer who shared some stuff about how to do like basic lighting techniques. For her, it was second nature. Of course she knows it. But for us, we were like, oh, that's cool. I didn't even think about that. So you just share what you know, and they become your sales force. Suddenly, 20 people become like 200 and 300 and 500 people back behind them because they all know people who eventually they might refer to you. So that was the power of networking for me, and it grew my business dramatically with no marketing, no sales, no ads, no social media at that time, all my networking group.
Yeah, that's powerful. What a phenomenal networking experience you had. And I think that quote that you shared is probably something really important for our listeners to really tag onto because a lot of times people are a little bit, I would say a little bit careless with how they network. You know, if they're unfamiliar with it, they just think, I just need to go connect with everybody. Well, I think it's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we can make. And I know that, I'm sure that you've had lots of experiences where you've kind of like niche down with your business and getting more and more specific. I would love for you to maybe just share a little bit about what was that process like for you as you're networking and you got, your sphere of influence, but then you start to realize, wow, I'm really, really good at helping this type of person. What was that niching down experience like for you in your business?
Yeah, it was a painful process because much like everybody, I did everything in the beginning. I always joke about it because, and you could see my first business card. You can go to joshhall.co/business card. My first 3 services were website related, which included like MySpace pages back then, websites, online stuff, social media graphics, graphic design, like brochures, business cards, flyers, and then drum lessons. Because I was in the web design world, or I was in the band world, and I thought, I do drum lessons too. Why not put that? And I had like this studio idea. And then once I started getting real clients, they were like, Josh, why is drum lessons on this? Like, that's not even remotely related. So I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Like, that shows you how non-business minded I was. But it was a good lesson in that you got to refine your services. And usually I generally recommend refining your services first, because it's going to be way easier to get the right type of clients if you know your services really well. Then you can refine your niche, or your niche, as our UK friends might say, with like the type of clients you're going to work with. Because I never went so niche that I only work with certain industries. A lot of people do, and that's fine. But I was a generalist. I worked with steel companies, I work with real estate people, I work with automotive people, I worked with photographers, whatever. But I did learn to refine my services. And then eventually I was doing all these different things, and I realized I'm killing it with websites. I've got price points that are $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 up. I cannot be spending time doing $200 business cards anymore. I'm sorry, I hate to be throwing out quotes, but I got another quote for you. And it was that what got me here won't get me there. Yeah. And that was so impactful to me, because I loved my graphic design services, and I got really good at design, and they were really important with opening doors for websites. But I realized I don't need this anymore. So I phased it out, and then eventually I focused on just websites. And that's what became the focus for me, and really helped grow my business even more, because I wasn't Josh, the graphic designer / web guy / drum lesson guy. It was Josh, websites. And then everything under websites would, build out from there.
Ooh, I'm so glad that you shared that idea of what got you here won't get you there. I literally just last week had a discussion and told people, I think especially, for those of us who carry a certain, maybe above, I'm going to be careful with this, but, above normal level of giftedness and being able to do a lot of things fairly well. It's really easy to get into that space in your head where you think, well, I'm good at it. I should be the one to do it. But I just literally said to somebody last week, just because I can doesn't mean I should.
Yes. Yeah. And
that is such a mind shift, especially for an entrepreneur. Those of you who are listening, who are in that entrepreneurial space, man, go for it. Keep digging. Keep going with what you're doing, because there is a result if you keep rolling, but also recognize that along your path, as you start to gain a level of success, there are certain times where you're going to recognize it's time to let go of something. Yep. And even though it's been kind of your baby, it's really important to let that baby grow up and walk out the door and give it to somebody else. So thanks for sharing that, Josh. Hey, guys, we're going to give a little bit of a break here. All of us have been drinking from the fire hose that Josh is firing from. It's been fantastic information. But while we take this little bit of a break, I want to share our second sponsor for today's episode. The People You Should Know podcast is sponsored by Axe Token. Axe is a brand new cryptocurrency and NFT built upon principles that are truly unprecedented in today's financial market. Axe is here to help you build legacy and generational wealth while also performing acts of kindness that change the lives of orphans, widows, and survivors of abuse. To visit them and learn more about their upcoming public launch, visit www.axetoken.com.
So, Josh, you went from having and building this really successful website design agency like you were doing amazing, to then beginning to move into webpreneur is what we're kind of calling it, but moving into doing some more stuff, doing courses. I just really wanted to ask kind of how joshhall.co was birthed and how that transition kind of went for you from In Transit to joshhall.co.
Yeah, so I was running my web design agency and I started scaling it on a very small level, and I realized like, wow, I got something that's, pretty legit here. And I had started teaching at I was more like a mentor for a local high school that was like a tech high school.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this program that I got invited to help mentor some kids about like digital design and graphics and stuff. And I would just share about what I was doing with websites and design.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the kids were in it for like video game design, but then a few of them were really interested in graphic design and websites. And they were like, how much do you make? Like, you make over $100,000 a year and you work from home? What? And those kids really inspired me. I only had a few of those that were serious about business, but they really inspired me. And then I found out that I actually have like this teaching talent and I have an itch for this. It was also about 7 years into my business. That seems to be fairly common. There's like this 7-year itch thing where it seems like a lot of people, whether it's 5 years or after that, you end up getting, whether you're bored or it gets stale or you just want to pivot to something else. It seems to be common. And I realized I love this teaching thing. And then the tools that I use, the content manager for one of the tools that I use in WordPress, I found out lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I was like, oh, I'd love to connect with him. That would be awesome. I took him to coffee and just I told him about what I was up to. And he was like, dude, you have an awesome business. And he's like, we have this blog, no pressure. It gets like millions of readers a month on this blog. But he's like, would you be interested in sharing some of your processes and stuff? And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, really? Like, I don't feel like this is anything wild. And he's like, dude, you're killing it. Like that's something to share with people if interested. And then I got invited on as a blog author for this company called Elegant Themes, which produced Divi, which Danny, are you using Divi for websites?
I use Divi and I don't see. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me this question.
That's all right.
I'm going through a little bit of a divorce right now with Divi. I feel like
Divi divorce. Well, either way, the company behind Divi, I started blogging for them. But that's how this all. It's all good. That's how this started. I started blogging for them, and then I was like, wow, I really enjoy this. And then I was like, then I started doing tutorials. That eventually led to courses. And then before I knew it, my personal brand at joshhall.co was like well exceeding my web design income. And that's when I, long story short, chose to go full time with courses. And then I went into a business that was completely different than my agency, which was face-to-face, service-based, networking, referral-based. This is completely online. 100% online, SEO based, content marketing, completely different set of challenges. And that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years. So that's how I started that.
Awesome. It's funny that you asked about Divi because whenever there's something that happens in the web design world, like I'm getting ready to make a change, I'm always thinking to myself, I wonder what Josh Hall would think about this. Like wonder if he's having the same experience right now. So, was there like a specific time for you? So, you started joshhall.co, but was there like a specific thing that happened, a story maybe that you can share with us when you were like, you know what, it's time to sell In Transit Studios. And just move into this full time. Was there like a trigger moment or a specific thing that happened?
Yeah. I mean, I essentially started this brand at joshhall.co as a side hustle, as a little passion project. Luckily, I was scaling my agency to the point where I was really only working at most about 20 hours in the agency. So that left me as much time as I wanted in the rest of the week to make tutorials and then get into courses. And then I started just building course after course after course. And I had the suite of courses that was really doing well and selling. And I got to a point, there was a couple aspects of it. One was I completed like the last course in the suite of courses that I wanted. And it was right when COVID started. And that, for me, I saw this huge influx of students because so many people were getting laid off or couldn't work. And then they were wanting to finally dive into web design if they were interested in it. Or maybe they were following my stuff, doing a side hustle in web design. And then they were like, going for the courses. So I had this huge demand for my courses and additionally more support from me. And I'd already got to the point with my agency where I was like, I'd never, and by no means did I get burned out or I didn't dread it. I was just kind of done. I was like, I'm not looking forward to do it. Like, I didn't even want to do sales calls anymore. I wasn't engaged with the projects like I was. I just knew like, this is what I want to do. I was basically getting through the day job that I created so I could work on what I really wanted to. And that was a red flag for me. That was like, okay, it's time to get this off my plate. And I had a choice. I was like, I could either still scale the agency and keep complete ownership of it, but that's going to require bringing in more people, a whole lot of training. I'm not going to be able to devote my time to courses and my students. So I just decided I want to sell it, get it off my plate. Yep. And I actually ended up selling it to one of my students who got his business to 6 figures and very entrepreneurial. And I was like, dude, very communicative, very people person. He had been a pastor. So I was like, if you can be a pastor, you can do anything. Nothing's going to be harder than that probably. So I was like, I felt like he would be a good fit. And yeah, I had him take over the agency, and it was not a sexy sell. I didn't sell it for a whole lot of money at once. I was not in a yacht the week after. It was a sell at a certain amount within a 10-year period. I basically get paid as a consultant now for the agency, but I still have my foot in the door with processes, systems, and I'm kind of like a coach to him and the team. And that's left me with all the rest of my time for my courses and what I do with helping people now build their own web design business.
Yeah, I think it's a really awesome transition, Josh. If we kind of take all the parts of your story, going all the way back to at the beginning, you caring so much about your clients, really wanting to do well for them. Here you are now coming full circle and actually doing the same exact thing, but through that teaching methodology. I think that's such a great stream that runs through your story. And I just wanted to point that out to our listeners to pay attention to your passions. Don't always think that you have to do them in the exact same way. What might be something important to you, previously in life or right now might produce a different level of fruit or opportunity down the road. So I think that was just a really good thing to point out. I think, Josh, one of the things that is a curiosity for me as we're talking about the story is obviously some point along the line, your networking transitioned from being people to being digital. And obviously all of us went through a force feed with that when it came to COVID and just how, society and how we interact on the web changed. What was that transition like for you? What did you notice? What are you noticing about the digital networking world that you would say these are some really important things to pay attention to in this new world that we live in?
Yeah, it was different because I went from that networking group, which was my primary, initial network other than my personal network and everything. And then online, what I found was there were so many communities and groups about websites and were more like-minded people. It was actually honestly way easier to transition, I feel like, because we were all using the same tools, having the same challenges, and we were all interested in the same things. And website people, they're not like, what is my email? What is a domain? So it's a lot easier to work with them sometimes. But I say that to say, I really enjoy the community aspect. I had become a community builder through my networking group, and that translated seamlessly into online. Now, the way you do things might be different, whether it's a webinar or a Zoom call or just, forum type commenting and stuff, but it was the same as walking into a networking group and talking with this person for a bit, sharing what you know about this. Somebody asked a question like, oh yeah, you do this and this and this. It was just like that. It was just digital. So the skill set is all the same. It's just, like you mentioned, Dave, how you go about it might be a little bit different. But gosh, that also took me into a whole new market of global partners and people. I never looked at my time zone app until I started working with people who were in Australia and the UK and South Africa. Now I'm working with people and I have students all over the world, and it's very different. But what's really cool about that is you get exposed to way different people. I mean, I have people who I can tell different English accents now. I can tell cool. Oh, you're probably South England, or you're probably closer to Scotland or Ireland or something, aren't you? I'm cultured. I'm basically cultured now, but I never was before having an online community. So there's a lot of pros with online community. And I still think there's a really important place for face-to-face things. Luckily, a lot of companies and a lot of organizations do like in-person meetups whenever you can. But the fact that we're all meeting online now is super, super beneficial. And I would say for anyone diving into any business, like find your people. There's free groups. If you can, and as soon as you feel led, pay for a premium group. Danny was in my web design club for a while, which is my coaching community. That is a completely different community than a free Facebook group. You're going to get the best of the best like-minded people. So what I would say is just go, like, find a community online. Don't be a taker. It's the same rules as a networking group. Be a giver, share your knowledge. That will attract people to you. Don't ask for, like, don't be like, hey, hire me. I'm desperate for work. Share what you know, be likable, and try to help people. That will attract people to you. And you never know where those opportunities and type of things are going to come from when you just meet somebody online. Everyone who I hired to help me with my business came from these online groups. Virtually. There's a couple people local I got connected with, but like my closest friends and network now are people online that I met.
Yeah, Josh, one of the things this is a staple question that we ask everybody every single time they're on here, because Dave and I have this belief based off of experience that without like networking with people, without being in relationship with people, you're not going to be whoever you were designed to be. Like, you're not going to reach your greatest potential, because people have the ability to unlock things. So like an example of that was even just Dave prying and asking me questions and saying, hey, what do you like to do? What are things you like to do? So I wanted to ask you, like, as you've been networking and as you've been out there kind of, rubbing shoulders with people outside of your wife, because a lot of times people are like, oh, my wife, who is the person that you've met with that really has unlocked the most in you as you've been networking?
Ooh, gosh, there's a ton of people. I think since it's top of mind and really fresh for me, there's quite a few. You need to find somebody who challenges you. Like, you want somebody who supports you, but you need somebody to challenge you. You don't. Right. Like, everyone can't be a cheerleader or a yes man. You want somebody to be like, what? Maybe you could do it this way. I'm in a mastermind group with a guy named Jason Gracia, who runs a site called Swift Sites. They build websites for coaches. And we meet once, actually my call's with him and the group after this.
Okay.
Once a month we get together and we talk shop, high level stuff. Everyone is running 6-figure agencies of some level. And I'm actually in the middle of like refreshing a lot of my programs and going to be offering more high ticket type of stuff at a much higher price point than I've had in the past. Mm-hmm. And the main impetus for that was Jason being like, dude, your prices are so low for what you do. And I've had a lot of students tell me like, dude, this should be probably way more. Like, I took this $3,000 course that wasn't a quarter as good as your $500 course. So I needed someone to tell me, like, it looks like you're at a different place now. And that's kind of what's helped me take this next step in my business and really maturing it and being able to, quite frankly, just provide better programs for my students at a higher level and being much more engaging. And I'll probably give up quantity and focus on quality. I'm expecting that.
Right. My
audience may not be as quote unquote big, but they're going to be getting much higher results, much more engaged. And that's kind of the next step for me. But I needed Jason to tell me, dude, like, you need to charge way more than you're charging for your stuff. You're way more valuable. This is something he told me. I'll relay to you guys too. This is really interesting. He was like, Josh, how much have you made since you started doing design? I was like, oh, I didn't really think about that from total. I was like, probably, and I'm happy to share here. Like, since I started doing design, probably about $1.5 million for about my 11-year journey. And he was like, so you have $1.5 million of knowledge. And he's like, your information is worth $1.5 million. Charge more for that information. I was like, I never even think about it. But that goes for everybody. Like, somebody who's early in the journey, maybe you made, like 25,000 one year, 50 the next, and then another 50. Well, now you're experienced in like over 6 figures worth of information. You can charge way more for your stuff. So I'm getting off topic, but I needed someone to like really make me reset how I thought about pricing and offers and value.
That was gold. So
yeah,
thank you for taking a little bit of a rabbit trail on that question, Josh.
That's awesome.
You really provided some great insight. I just want to take a second as we're kind of wrapping up here, just to not only thank you for taking the time to be on here with us, but really commend you in a couple things, because what comes really strong through as you share is that you have definitely devoted your life to being a learner. And man, how powerful is that you just, you're clearly gleaning from lots of different sources. You're providing quotes. You're just like a quote machine here on the episode, which thank you for that, because what that does for our listeners is recognize how important it is to be, valuing voices that we bring in, and taking the things we can learn from them and applying it to what we do. So good for you for being devoted to being that learner in your space. And man, I'll tell you what, you must be. I haven't listened to anything. I'm just going to fully confess. This is our first interaction. I've only heard about you through Danny. I've watched the episode where he was on with you. But this is not the last time that I'm going to be checking out your stuff, because you are a tremendous teacher. And that really comes through in just how you communicate, and your desire to really pass along value to other people. So thank you for bringing that to our episode today.
Oh, well, thank you, Dave. I so appreciate that, man. And what you just said reminded me of like the most important thing when it comes to starting a business and actually doing it. And that is that you cannot be alone. Like if you don't surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you and support you, and you just try to do everything yourself and you just rely on you and Google. Now, Danny found me on Google, so I can't knock that completely, but Danny also is a community person. Like, there is a reason why in prison, the worst thing that can happen for a prisoner is solitary confinement, right?
Right.
Same thing in business. Like if I told somebody, like if I was like, I want this person to fail, I would make them do everything themselves and try to figure it out without anyone else's help. That's the surest way they're going to fail.
Yeah.
So don't do that. Like surround yourself with people, and you don't need to be an expert networker or this like charismatic, like douchey influencer guy. You don't need to be that person. Just talk with people and get help where you need to, and try to help where you can. You'll make friends, you'll make partners, and that's how you build a support system behind you, because you just cannot do things alone, especially now. So get some people around you and go and listen to shows like this.
Oh man, that right there, that's a reel that's going on all the socials. Seriously, I have one little point here, Josh. I wanted you to have a chance to highlight any of your products you want to talk about. Let people know how they can find you and connect with you better. So, man, the floor is yours. Tell people about any products you want to, and any of those social channels.
Yeah, well, you can just go to my website, which is joshhall.co. That'll take you to anything you're interested in as far as courses and other avenues. But I will say, since we're talking on a podcast, my podcast is the Web Design Business Podcast. And yeah, if you're interested in, dipping your toe into web design, that show is loaded with amazing guests. Danny, you've been on sharing your experience. I do solo episodes there as well. So yeah, I would say head over to the Web Design Business Podcast and just see what topics intrigue you. And then hopefully there's something for you that lights you up. And sounds like Dave's going there next. So there we go.
Right on.
Absolutely. Man, I'm just so tempted. We're wrapping up here. I got to ask you one question. This is a personal question.
I got a few minutes. So
I'm going to put my little vulnerable self out there, Josh, because you have been, you're somebody who I consider a mentor. Even still, I know I'm currently not in the web design club, but man, what was your first impression the first time I sent you like a video email? I don't know if you remember that, but I sent you this video email. I was like, I felt so awkward. Like if we're being honest, I felt so awkward. I'm like, felt like I was reaching out to somebody, and I was like, I have no idea if this guy's going to respond to me. But what was your first impression, man? Just for funsies.
I love it. I absolutely love when people send me videos. Ideally, not longer than 5 or 10 minutes, because I might have to skim through it. But I love getting videos back because not many people do it. And like the problem for a course creator is generally you don't know your students, and it's like, okay, I have like 100 students in this course. That's awesome, but If you're not interacting with them, I have no idea who they are. I have no idea how it's helping unless I ask for referrals, which is one reason I started a membership, a coaching community. So like when you and others send me videos, Danny, it's awesome because like, yeah, I saw your order come through, this Danny Ferry guy, but I don't know who you are. I don't know where you're from. I don't know anything about you. So that was awesome. I think it's so important. And also, side note, we'll have to do round 2 because we could talk about this all day, but send personal videos to your clients. They go such a long way. You can just do it on your phone or use Loom, and it adds a whole nother element of like that know, like, and trust factor that's so important in business. So yeah, I loved it, man. I think it's awesome in so many ways.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So Cam has been doing some work for me, Josh.
Cool.
Some VA work. And so you've been dropping all these links. And just every time you drop a link, she just has more and more work to do. So I'm going to make sure that I just let her know. I'm going to be like, hey, Cam, blame Josh for this.
Nice. Yes. Give her all the snippets to work on.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for being with us today. Truly has been a pleasure. And I just want to thank everyone listening for joining us this week on the People You Should Know podcast. Again, a very special thank you to today's guest, Josh Hall, for sharing his journey with us. Make sure to never miss an episode of the podcast by subscribing to our mailing list at heydouyouknow.com. That's heydouyouknow.com. Once again, thank you for joining the People You Should Know podcast. We hope that today's episode has inspired you to connect with others and unlock your greatness. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the People You Should Know podcast. Do you know somebody amazing? Do you wish everyone knew about them? We can't wait to hear from you. Drop by one of our social pages and send us a message with your nominee to be a featured guest on People You Should Know.